Jasmine Taylor clutched her wedding notebook tightly as she hurried out of the grand glass-paneled office, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Her face was streaked with tears, but she held her head high, refusing to let anyone see just how much the meeting had crushed her. She stepped into the crisp Los Angeles air, her heart pounding as if it were trying to escape the ache growing in her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Jasmine had imagined this moment so many times before. Walking into an office like this, with its towering gold accents and lush white orchids, meeting the planner who would help make her dream wedding a reality. The wedding she'd been planning in her heart since she was a little girl, playing dress-up with her mom's old scarves and pretending they were flowing veils. Inside, everything had started so well. Jasmine had greeted Elaine Peterson with a firm handshake and a bright smile. Elaine was everything Jasmine expected from one of the most sought-after wedding planners in Beverly Hills. Elegant, polished, and exuding confidence. The room itself seemed to echo Elaine's status, with its luxurious decor and framed photos of her grinning beside celebrities on their big days. For the first few minutes, Jasmine had felt hopeful. She'd described her vision, a garden wedding at sunset, soft blush tones, twinkling lights hanging from the trees. Her eyes sparkled as she spoke about her fiancé, Tyrone, and their shared dream of a ceremony that celebrated not just their love, but the journey they'd taken together. But then came the subtle shifts. At first, Jasmine thought she was imagining things. The way Elaine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes when Jasmine mentioned her family's involvement. The quick, dismissive glance at her notebook when Jasmine explained her budget, which was substantial by most standards but apparently not enough for Beverly Hills elite. Then came the questions, polite on the surface but sharp beneath. "Are you sure this is the right venue for you?" Elaine had asked, her tone laced with something Jasmine couldn't quite name yet, but felt deep in her gut. Jasmine, determined not to let her excitement waver, had responded with grace, explaining how much she loved the venue's charm and its meaning to her and Tyrone. But Elaine barely seemed to listen, her eyes already scanning the room, as if searching for a reason to end the meeting. And then it happened. "I don't think this is the right fit," Elaine said abruptly, standing and smoothing her tailored blazer as though the conversation was over. Jasmine froze. I don't understand," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did I say something wrong?" Elaine's expression softened, but not with kindness. It was the sort of condescending pity Jasmine had encountered before, the kind that said, "You're not worth my time, but I'll pretend to care." "Oh, no, dear," Elaine replied, her voice dripping with insincerity. "It's just, I have a certain clientele. I don't think I'm the best person for what you're looking for." Jasmine's stomach dropped. The words hung in the air, their meaning unmistakable. She wanted to fight back, to ask Elaine exactly what she meant, but the lump in her throat made it impossible to speak. Elaine's assistant, a young woman with nervous eyes, avoided Jasmine's gaze as she held the door open for her. As Jasmine walked past, she overheard a whispered comment that made her heart stop. "You know how Elaine is about certain people," the assistant muttered under her breath to a colleague. The words stung more than Jasmine thought possible. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, but to her, everything felt muted. She leaned against a nearby bench, tears threatening to spill again as her thoughts raced. Was it her? Had she somehow done something to deserve this? No. Deep down, Jasmine knew the truth. It wasn't her dress ideas, her budget, or even her vision for the wedding. It was something she couldn't change, something that Elaine had judged her for before she'd even spoken a word. Her fingers trembled as she opened her notebook, skimming the detailed plans she'd poured her heart into. She saw Tyrone's handwriting in the margins, little notes of encouragement he'd left for her during late nights of planning. "We've got this," one note read, with a smiley face drawn next to it. Jasmine took a deep breath, wiping her tears. She didn't want to tell Tyrone what had happened, didn't want him to see the pain she felt, but she knew she couldn't hide this, not from him, not from herself. As she stood and began walking to her car, her determination slowly began to replace the despair. This was supposed to be the happiest time of her life, and she wasn't going to let someone like Elaine Peterson take that from her. Still, the question lingered. What do I do now? Jasmine sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clutching the mug of chamomile tea Tyrone had made for her. She hadn't taken a sip. The tea had long gone cold, but she didn't notice. Her thoughts were swirling like a storm. Tyrone sat beside her, his brow furrowed as he studied her face. He had never seen Jasmine like this, not silent, not defeated. I just don't get it, Jasmine finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why me? Why does it always have to be about something I can't change? Tyrone reached for her hand. It's not about you, Jazz. It's about her. Don't let her make you think it's your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. The words were comforting, but they didn't erase the sting of Elaine's rejection. Jasmine looked down at her notebook, the same one she carried into that meeting, now sitting on the coffee table like a reminder of the humiliation she'd endured. She had spent hours filling its pages with ideas and sketches, carefully planning every detail of the wedding. It was supposed to be her guide to the happiest day of her life, but now it felt like a book of broken dreams. I told you this would happen, Kayla said, leaning forward from the armchair across the room. She wasn't harsh, just honest. People like Elaine Peterson don't care about us, Jazz. You walk in there with your vision, your heart on your sleeve, and all she sees is someone who doesn't belong. Jasmine felt a lump rise in her throat. I thought maybe she'd see me, not just... She trailed off, unsure how to put the weight of her feelings into words. Kayla crossed her arms, her eyes fiery with anger. You're not invisible, Jazz, and you're not staying quiet about this. What am I supposed to do? Jasmine asked, her voice cracking. Go on Yelp and leave a bad review? That's not going to change anything. Kayla raised an eyebrow, her expression sharp. No, but the internet will. You think Elaine gets to keep doing this without people finding out? If we don't speak up, who will? Jasmine hesitated. She wasn't the type to put herself out there. Not like this. But as she looked at Kayla, then at Tyrone, she felt a flicker of something else. A need to fight back. Later that night, after Tyrone had gone to bed, Jasmine stayed up scrolling through her phone. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but her gut told her there was more to this than what had happened to her. And she was right. It started with a search. Elaine Peterson wedding reviews. At first, all she found were glowing testimonials and photos of celebrity weddings. But as she dug deeper, she noticed something odd. The same handful of complaints kept popping up, buried under the praise. They weren't explicit, but Jasmine could read between the lines. Not inclusive, one reviewer had written. Another mentioned a lack of understanding for cultural traditions. Her stomach turned as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just about her. Elaine Peterson had a pattern, a quiet but unmistakable way of shutting out people who didn't fit her mold. Jasmine closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. The anger simmering inside her felt different now. It wasn't just personal. The next day, Kayla didn't give Jasmine a chance to second-guess herself. We're doing this, she said, holding up her phone. I'll record it. You tell your story. No fancy editing, just the truth. Jasmine sat at the kitchen table, nervous but resolute. Kayla set up the camera, her voice firm as she encouraged Jasmine. Just be yourself. Say what you feel. The words poured out of Jasmine like water breaking through a dam. She spoke about the meeting, about Elaine's dismissal, about the comments she'd overheard. Her voice shook at first, but as she continued, it grew steadier, fueled by a sense of purpose. When they uploaded the video on X, Jasmine expected maybe a few dozen views, mostly from friends and family. But by the end of the day, it had hundreds. By the next morning, thousands. People were sharing it, commenting, and tagging others. Not all the comments were supportive. Some accused Jasmine of overreacting, of playing the victim. Others were cruel, laced with the kind of hatred Jasmine had spent her whole life trying to rise above. But the positive messages far outweighed the negative. Strangers from across the country reached out to share their own stories of discrimination, their own battles with people like Elaine. Jasmine tried to focus on those messages, the ones that reminded her she wasn't alone. But the growing attention was overwhelming. Every notification, every new comment felt like a spotlight shining on her. And yet, She couldn't bring herself to regret speaking out. When the local news called, Jasmine hesitated. Tyrone squeezed her hand, his voice steady. You've already come this far, Jazz. You've got a whole community behind you now. Don't stop. Jasmine took a deep breath before answering. The reporter's voice on the other end was kind but professional, asking for an interview to share her side of the story. Jasmine agreed, her heart racing. Later that night, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her pick up. The voice on the other end was warm, familiar in a distant way. Hi, Jasmine. This is Karen from the Morning Spotlight. We saw your video and your story. We'd like to invite you onto the show. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. Jasmine's palms were damp as she sat on the plush, white couch under the bright studio lights. The host, a woman known for her warmth and empathy, leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on Jasmine with genuine interest. Take your time, she said softly, her tone encouraging. Jasmine nodded, gripping the edges of her chair as she tried to steady her breath. She had rehearsed her words countless times, but now that the moment was here, her chest felt tight and her thoughts scrambled like loose papers in the wind. The audience sat in hushed anticipation, their faces a mixture of curiosity and support. Jasmine knew they were strangers, but she couldn't shake the pressure of their silent stares. This isn't just about me, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard and tried again. It's about everyone who's ever felt like they weren't enough just because of who they are. The host nodded, her expression one of quiet understanding. What happened to you was deeply unfair. Can you tell us more about how it made you feel in that moment? Jasmine hesitated, the memory flashing vividly in her mind. She remembered the way Elaine's sharp words had cut through her excitement, leaving behind an ache she hadn't been able to shake. It felt like my happiness didn't matter, she said slowly. I walked in there, so ready to plan this beautiful day, and she looked at me like I didn't belong, like I wasn't the kind of bride she wanted to work with. The host leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. That must have been incredibly painful. Jasmine nodded, her eyes glistening. It was, but it also made me realize something. This isn't just my story. There are so many people out there who've been treated like this. Shut out, dismissed, made to feel less than. And I couldn't stay quiet about it. I had to speak up, not just for me, but for all of us. As Jasmine spoke, the studio screens displayed clips from her viral video. The audience watched as the raw emotion in her words played out, her pain and determination striking a chord with so many. The host turned back to Jasmine, her voice filled with admiration. Your bravery has inspired so many people, but speaking out like this takes a toll. How have you been coping with all the attention? Jasmine took a deep breath, her thoughts drifting to Tyrone and Kayla. It's been overwhelming, she admitted. Some of the comments have been hard to read, but my family and friends have been my rock. They remind me why I'm doing this, even when it feels too big to handle. The camera panned to Tyrone, sitting in the audience with Kayla beside him. He gave Jasmine a small, reassuring smile, and she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The host smiled warmly. It's clear you have an amazing support system. And speaking of support, we have someone here today who wanted to do something special for you. Jasmine blinked, her heart skipping a beat. For me? The host gestured to the side of the stage, where the curtains parted to reveal a tall figure stepping into the spotlight. The audience gasped, and Jasmine's hand flew to her mouth as recognition dawned. Standing before her was one of the most renowned wedding planners in the world, their names synonymous with elegance and inclusivity. The planner smiled, their voice resonating with warmth and conviction. Jasmine, I saw your story, and I was deeply moved. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone, so I want to help. I'd be honored to plan your wedding, completely free of charge. The audience erupted into applause, their cheers filling the studio as Jasmine's eyes welled up with tears. Are you serious? She asked, her voice trembling. The planner nodded. Absolutely. This is more than just a wedding. It's a stand for love and justice. You deserve to have the day of your dreams without anyone making you feel like you don't belong. Jasmine covered her face with her hands, overcome with emotion. The host reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "This is what happens when people come together to support one another," she said, her voice steady and heartfelt. As the applause died down, the planner turned to Jasmine. "I'll work with you every step of the way to make this day everything you've ever imagined. And I hope it sends a message to the world that love is for everyone, no matter what." Jasmine nodded, her voice barely audible. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The moment felt surreal, like something out of a dream. But as Jasmine looked out at the audience, at Tyrone and Kayla, at the host and the planner who had extended such kindness, she felt something she hadn't in weeks: hope. The segment ended with the host thanking the audience and reminding everyone of the power of standing up against injustice. But for Jasmine, the real ending hadn't been written yet. This was just the beginning of something bigger than she had ever imagined. The sun cast a golden glow over the Malibu coastline as Jasmine stood beneath an arch of white roses and soft greenery. The ocean breeze carried the faint scent of salt and flowers, mingling with the quiet hum of anticipation from the gathered guests. Tyrone, standing at the altar with a smile that radiated warmth, seemed to anchor her as the weight of the moment washed over her. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration, a victory over the pain and prejudice that had tried to overshadow their love. Jasmine took a slow, deep breath, her heart swelling as her eyes scanned the faces of their family and friends. Some held tissues, dabbing at tears as the ceremony unfolded. Others beamed with joy, their hands clasped together as if sharing in the couple's triumph. Among them were people who had reached out after seeing her story, offering their own experiences of resilience and hope. Jasmine had never felt so connected to something larger than herself. As she reached Tyrone, her hand trembling slightly in his steady grip, her thoughts briefly drifted to the days after Elaine's rejection. She remembered the sleepless nights and the self-doubt that had gnawed at her. Was it worth speaking up? Would anyone care? Yet now, standing in this beautiful moment, surrounded by love and support, she felt an undeniable sense of validation. Her voice had mattered. The ceremony unfolded with a mix of laughter and tears, each vow drawing the couple closer in the eyes of those watching. Jasmine's words were simple but heartfelt, reflecting not just her love for Tyrone, but the journey that had brought them here. "You've shown me what it means to be seen and valued," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "And together, we'll continue to stand for what's right, no matter how hard it gets." Applause rippled through the audience as they kissed, sealing their promises with a love that felt both fragile and unbreakable. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, Jasmine felt lighter than she had in months. But miles away, the atmosphere was starkly different. Elaine sat alone in her dimly lit office. The walls once adorned with photos of lavish events, now glaringly bare. The cancellation emails had piled up faster than she could process them, each one a reminder of how far she had fallen. Her name, once synonymous with luxury and exclusivity, had become a cautionary tale. She stared at her computer screen, the cursor blinking on the half-written apology she had debated posting for weeks. News clips played softly in the background, recounting the backlash her actions had sparked. Her name trended for all the wrong reasons, and former clients had distanced themselves, issuing statements that condemned her behavior. Elaine pressed her fingers to her temples, a wave of regret washing over her. She had built her career on precision and reputation, but in one careless moment, she had undone it all. Her dismissal of Jasmine hadn't just been unkind. It had been a reflection of a mindset she hadn't questioned until now. The public outcry had forced her to confront a truth she had long ignored. Her biases had hurt more people than she'd ever realized. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Elaine hit post on her apology video. Her voice cracked as she spoke to the camera, her polished exterior replaced with raw vulnerability. "I made a terrible mistake," she admitted, her eyes glistening. "My actions were rooted in ignorance, and I take full responsibility. I can only hope to learn from this and do better moving forward." But even as she closed her laptop, the emptiness of her office seemed to mock her. Elaine knew that apologies were just the beginning. Real change required more than words. It demanded action. Back at the reception, Jasmine and Tyrone shared their first dance under a canopy of twinkling lights. The music was soft, the kind that wrapped around the moment like a warm embrace. Jasmine rested her head on Tyrone's shoulder, her heart full as she glanced at Kayla, twirling nearby with their father. The laughter and joy of their loved ones filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension and heartbreak they had faced not long ago. As the night went on, Jasmine took a moment to address the crowd, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today isn't just about Tyrone and me," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It's about standing up for love, for kindness, and for each other. What happened to us could have made us bitter, but instead, it showed us the power of unity and resilience. I hope our story reminds you all that change starts with each of us, whether it's speaking out against injustice or simply choosing kindness every day." The crowd erupted into cheers, their applause echoing in the night. Jasmine's words carried a weight that transcended the celebration, leaving everyone with a sense of purpose. As the evening drew to a close, Jasmine and Tyrone found themselves surrounded by a circle of friends and family, their faces glowing with pride and love. The media buzz and public attention no longer felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like a platform, a chance to inspire others to stand up and speak out. In the quiet moments after the reception, as they watched the waves crash against the shore, Jasmine leaned into Tyrone, her heart finally at peace. "We did it," she whispered, a smile playing on her lips. Tyrone nodded, his arm wrapping around her. "And we're just getting started.